Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third ever episode of the Raise Hail Report. I am your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by the co host of the Big Doug and Carmi show, George Carmi. George, it's great to have you on.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you hopping on. And, getting right into it, today we're going to talk a little bit about Terry McLaurin's contract extension, which has obviously made a lot of headlines recently.
hmm
And the first thing I want to talk about is the tweet from Jordan Schultz a few days ago, where
hmm
he said that Terry McLaurin has made it clear to the team that he's frustrated with the lack of progress on a long term deal. And, first and foremost, considering that Jordan Schultz works for Bleacher Report, obviously that's not, he doesn't lose that much credibility, but, it's not ESPN. He doesn't work
hmm
for NFL Network.
hmm
No other NFL insiders around the league announced this news. And then neither McLaurin or Adam Peters has said anything to the public. How reliable do you think this tweet really was?
So I think Jordan Schultz is a reliable media member.
Yeah.
But I think it also shows you the connections to who he has, right? I think Terry McLaurin, he will do things the appropriate way and the respectful way, and he's not going to air out dirty laundry. But what you do is you essentially get an agent to argue on your behalf, and I think that's what happened here, right? Jordan
Mhm.
Schultz obviously has some sort of connection with Terry McLaurin's agent. Terry McLaurin wants to get the public arguing in his favor, so
Mhm.
essentially the agent reached out to Jordan Schultz, "Hey, can you put out a report for us? I want you to get some steam, put some
Yeah.
pressure on the Commanders to get this contract moving," right? So I think there is some validity behind it. I think there is some stalls. I believe Washington wants to sign Terry McLaurin long term, or not
Mhm.
long term, or maybe a 3-year contract.
Yeah.
But I think there are some hangups because we keep on hearing repeatedly about, hey, Terry McLaurin is 30 years old. Do wide receivers technically fall off a cliff at that point? Where are they going to go? And I believe that Washington essentially wants him, but maybe the length of time and maybe the amount of money that keeps coming up over and over again. Last thing I'll kind of touch on is I believe they're looking at comps, right? I think Terry McLaurin wants to be in that $30 million club. There is that breaking point. I believe DJ Moore and who's the other person? T. Higgins are kind of hovering around 28 million. And those are, typically wide receiver twos, maybe could argue wide receiver ones. And I believe that Terry McLaurin wants to be in that DK Metcalf realm, that $30 million
Right.
realm, maybe a little bit higher, maybe like right above him at 33 million per year. So I think that's the sticking point. I think it's going to get done. I don't know how concerned you are, Matthew. I'm not very concerned
Mhm.
altogether, but that's kind of where I'm at.
So you mentioned how maybe it was his agent just trying to draw more attention to the situation. That said,
Mhm.
how realistic is it that McLaurin, in your mind, really is frustrated with this whole situation?
I think he's probably slightly agitated, right? In any
Mhm.
type of career that you have, you want
Yeah.
to, prove your worth. You want to get your fair value. Terry McLaurin's done everything the right way, and to that regard, he has a great arguing point, right? He's been on the team for what 6 years, I believe now.
Yeah.
He's had 11 different quarterbacks. He's seen 3 different team names. The Washington football team, the
Mhm.
Redskins, and the Commanders now. Some
Yeah.
crazy ownership as well, and he's never complained. He's done things the right way, right? So I think he
Mhm.
like if you look at his resume, if you look at his arguing points, it's okay. You know what? I've done everything the right way. I've never complained. I've worked hard. I've always showed up to camp. The only time I've never showed up to camp is when I want to have a contract, in
Mhm.
2022. And I think he's probably slightly frustrated, but at the same time, I think he's proving his worth. And I think in the NFL, that's truly what you have. Like not attending OTAs and not attending these like mandatory mini camps is your signal, your flag to, hey, that's your one bargaining chip. Because for more often than not, the NFL, the owners and the contracts, they have the ones that are in power. This is the one time Terry McLaurin can flex his power, in my opinion.
And then, if this report by Jordan Schultz is true,
hmm
um, I mean, you said that you're not really concerned that the extension hasn't gotten done yet. What do you think the urgency to get this deal done looks like on Washington's end right now?
Hmm. That's a good point, actually. I think Washington wants to get Terry McLaurin in late July, right? July is when
Mhm.
actual training camp happens in Ashburn, when you have
Yeah.
daily practices and really starting to get your reps and implementing your
Yeah.
offense. So I think that's where the key date's going to be. It's going to be mid-July, late July. I don't think there is any urgency on Washington's part right now. I think they're constantly maybe like I think it was expected. I think they knew Terry McLaurin wasn't going to come. I think maybe the stress maybe is more media driven right now. Like like he didn't come in 2022. This is a typical, it's a 3-day practice. And typically, I don't know if they have announced it yet. You might know more than me, but typically, these 3-day mandatory mini camps, it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And if there's good attendance and good support, they typically cancel that third day anyways. I'm not even
Yeah.
sure if tomorrow's going to be an official practice. I don't know.
I have heard that they are doing a practice
You are doing
tomorrow.
a practice tomorrow? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I know typically, routinely they will cancel that third day.
Mhm.
So, I figured that, they had a rest day for Laremy Tunsil today and Zach Ertz. I'm not sure these days are vital long term because I know who Terry McLaurin Terry McLaurin is and what his value is to the team.
Mhm.
And, I think the urgency is more like, hey, let's be in touch. I do care about you. We are going to get this done, but let's shelve this maybe later on in July. That's kind of where I'm at.
And then, in terms of money, you kind of touched on this earlier. A lot of people are expecting Terry to get paid similar to what DK Metcalf got paid.
Mm-hmm.
Metcalf signed a 4-year, $132 million deal with the Steelers,
Mm-hmm.
$33 million a year. And there's a lot of different factors that play into this. They were in the same draft class.
Mm-hmm.
Terry McLaurin had the better season last year.
Mm-hmm.
DK Metcalf is younger. There's a lot of different perspectives you could look at when
Mm-hmm.
talking about this money. I guess is that around the same range you're expecting to see from McLaurin? And what do you think Washington is going to be willing to pay him?
I think they'll extend it. I do feel that the DK Metcalf benchmark is the appropriate benchmark. I don't know if you have the actual salary contracts in front of you right now. Jamar Chase, I think, was approaching 40 million. He might have eclipsed 40 million, actually, now that I think about it. But there's also the top 2 or 3 wide receivers in the league. I think with Terry's age and with his production, it's fair to say he doesn't deserve a top 5 contract, but I do think that DK Metcalf is that waterline, that threshold that they want to break. And I think Josh Harris is going to eventually pay it. And, from the national perspective, it might be slightly an overpay to give him 33 or 33 and a half per year to kind of get him above DK Metcalf to get him that $30 million threshold. But I think it's a good culture signing for the team because you might be overpaying a tiny bit, but you're proving that if you do the right thing consistently and you are a consummate professional, you're going to get rewarded for your work. I think that's what's important there. So I think it might come out higher than what people want it to be, but at the same time, it's pennies in a bucket at that point, right? What's 32 million versus 33?
Mhm.
You want to honor your franchise player, and you want him to retire as a commander.
And is this the last big contract or extension that McLaurin receives in his career, considering that, he's obviously getting up there in age?
More than likely, to be honest with you, right? This is probably the
Mhm.
biggest one that he's had. I think they had a 4-year contract as a rookie contract. He had one a couple years ago in 2022, which was a pretty sizable deal. But he was smart. He had a 3-year deal, allowing him to get one more large contract before it was all said and done. So here we are right now. It will more than likely be the biggest it will be the biggest contract of his entire career. If he
Mhm.
does get an extension at year 33, it'll probably be a 1-year, 2-year extension, maybe at a much smaller rate. But this is probably that. I think that's why it's so important to Terry to get this one done and done the right way because it is his biggest payday for his career, I think.
And then you mentioned this earlier, but, he's been missing mandatory OTAs. He missed yesterday, he missed today, he's gonna miss tomorrow.
Hmm.
Um, and, if he misses all 3 days, John Keim actually said he's gonna be fined, I think, $104,000, so
Hmm.
a lot of money for missing all 3 days. What does that tell you about the situation altogether? Should we raise an eyebrow at that, or is it more of kinda just the agent stuff that we were talking about earlier, just to kind of add more attention to this? Is it something we should sort of brush off?
I would brush it off actually, Matthew, because if you think about it, 101, I think it's 101,000 from what I got. You might know more than me, but
Sure.
I think it's 101,000. And if you think about it, if he gets a new contract in place, if he gets a $33 million contract, this all drops in the bucket in regard to what's going to happen big picture, right? So it might look bad at first, and 101,000 is a lot of money for you and me, but not necessarily for these professional players right
Yeah,
here, right?
yeah,
So I think he'll ultimately get it back when it's all said and done. I know Terry's working. For those that that may have missed it, he got married on Valentine's Day around February
yeah.
14th. So he's a newlywed. This might be his only time to kind of get away and kind of have some time with his wife during the downtime of the season. So I think he's kind of extending his June a little bit. But then once July comes around, I think he'll be fine. So that $101,000. That sounds reasonable to the normal human like you and I, but I think that's like monopoly money to these NFL players. They're not worried about a big picture.
And then, we saw the same situation with McLaurin in 2022, where
Mhm.
he was mandatory OTAs before signing his 3-year extension prior to the start of the season. How similar is this situation to his holdout that he had 3 years ago?
So I think this year he has some more merit to his argument, right?
Mhm.
He had a couple more quarterbacks. He had a
Yeah.
standout year. He was second team all pro. He had
Mhm.
41 votes as a second team. He has 42 votes as an all pro candidate and 3 votes for first team all pro. He had 13 touchdowns.
Mhm.
I believe the only wide receiver that had more than him was Jamar Chase at 17. So he's second
Mhm.
in the league in touchdown receptions. He scored in every single playoff game that he had.
Yeah.
He was a consummate professional. He had some big connections with Jaden Daniels, and that's what you want to do. We saw a running trend this whole offseason. They signed Laramie Tunsil, they signed Josh Connor. They want to build up and support Jaden Daniels. So having Terry McLaurin as his number one wide receiver, you want to have that safety net for him and keep him in tow. So I think Terry McLaurin has an arguing point. So I think Terry has a better case for why he should be being paid for what it was. From what I don't know if you saw or heard Matthew recently, but on the John Kine podcast,
Mhm.
he was talking about how in 2022 there was a debate on how much to pay Terry and what his worth was, right?
Yeah.
And basically, what happened was Dan Snyder was getting so much bad press, and there were so many
Mhm.
things that were going on. They kind of overpaid a tiny bit
Mhm.
just to kind of have a small win in the media and through
Mhm.
PR to ensure that Terry stayed in the team. I think
Mhm.
there is a little bit of that now. The one a couple weeks ago, I had a post about it's a 2 out of 10 urgency scale for me. How worried I am about Terry
Mhm.
McLaurin. The only concern I could potentially have is Adam Peters is a businessman. He's a true GM. He believes in his scouting prowess and he wants to add players to his team. So maybe in his mind, he's like, you know what, I can have Terry McLaurin for one more year and I can draft somebody later on. But I think Josh Harris, Mark Ein, the whole Hog ownership group, I think they're going to basically they know what he means to the fan base. They know about the marketing, and they're basically going to keep him in. I think for me, it's a no-brainer to be back in DC.
And then 2 things to consider. Um, Adam Peters is someone who likes to take his time on deals. He's
Mm-hmm.
not gonna rush anything. Um, so I think that's important to consider when you look at this. And then also I wanna ask, um, with now that he's missing mandatory OTAs, how does that maybe affect some of the younger guys, the Jalen Lanes or the Luke McCaffreys? What
Mm-hmm.
role could they get from him missing OTAs?
I think it's a net benefit, actually, Matthew, to
Mhm.
be honest with you, right? So,
Yeah. Mhm.
obviously, with Terry McLaurin rolling out with the ones, a lot of the attention, a lot of the targets will be going to Terry. And Terry's going to come well prepared. He's a seasoned veteran at this point. I think it's good for Jalen Lane to get out there to get some more reps, for Luke McCaffrey to get out there, get some more reps, kind of get more exposure to the first team offense, even because you never know. Injuries happen. We just saw today, we saw some injuries. We saw Noah Brown go down and Michael Gallup, he had a hamstring issue as well. So I think it is pretty important to have these wide receivers in camp. So I think Jalen Lane, I think Luke McCaffrey, even Ja'Cory Brooks, I think is going to get more exposure now too because
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
basically because Terry's out as well. So I think it's actually a benefit. Like it's
Mhm.
ultimately, it might not look great, big picture wise or in regard to like contracts, but at the same time,
Mhm.
if you're building a team and you're building depth, it doesn't hurt at all.
And then when you look at Terry's entire career with Washington, something that stood out is the fact that he's always wanted to be in Washington. He's
Hmm.
never complained. He's always been respectful about his situation, no matter how bad it has gotten. Other than maybe a guy, you look at Trey Hendrickson, for instance, and you
Hmm.
can clearly see he does not want to be in Cincinnati right now until they get that figured out. It's
Hmm.
not really the same thing
Hmm.
with Terry McLaurin in Washington. What do you think I guess his mindset looks like right now in terms of staying or leaving?
I think Terry has the mindset where he's going to stay. You kind
Mhm.
of brought up a good point, right? Trey Hendrickson, even Shamar Stewart to an extent. We're seeing these people airing
Oh,
their
yeah.
grievances out loud. They're
Yeah.
upset. They're complaining. They're basically like, "Hey, I don't believe in the franchise. I don't believe in where the direction of where the team is going."
Mhm.
I don't think Terry has that at all. And if you think about it, Terry hasn't said one thing. Like everything that we're hearing about the frustrations and the complaints are mostly coming from the media, coming from Jordan Schultz, coming from people that may be close to the situation, but he's being pretty professional in the situation where he's
Mhm.
not necessarily saying things out loud. I'm sure he's agitated a little bit, but I think ultimately he knows where he sits with the franchise. I think everything's going to be okay. And I don't know if you live in. I guess you are. I see the JMU shirts. I guess you live in Virginia. Like if you go to training camp, Terry knows his role. Like he stays after camp. He signs all the signatures. He basically there for 45 minutes to talk to all the fans. He looks them in the eyes and thanks them. I think he knows he is a forward-facing part of the program, and I think he knows that he's going to be. He's probably agitated, but I think he knows it's going to be okay.
And then, obviously he's coming off by far the best season of his career with the best quarterback he's played with in his career. 82 receptions, 1,096 receiving yards, and 13 touchdowns. Everyone's talking about the extension, and that's what we were just talking about. But assuming that this gets done, I think there is a really good chance this gets done. What can we expect to see from McLaurin this upcoming season in terms of on-field production, especially when you consider the addition of Deebo Samuel in free agency?
That's going to be really interesting. That's the $1 million question, right? So I still think
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin is going to be successful.
Mhm.
13 touchdowns was it's a huge watermark for him. I believe
Yeah.
he had 4, 5, 4, something along those lines over the past couple years leading up to that. So that 13 touchdowns was essentially an outlier for what he had altogether. Do I see him getting 13 touchdowns again? Probably not. I think it's pretty high, but you never know. Maybe Jaden Daniels takes a step and the offense is more of an explosive offense again, Do I see him as a 1,000-yard receiver? For sure. I believe Deebo Samuel is a great fit. I think he's a great fit for Cliff Kingsbury. I did a film breakdown with Mark Bullock a couple weeks ago on Deebo Samuel's fit, and he's going to fill that role that Olamide Zaccheaus and Diami Brown played last year, where they're going to be basically in the slot, maybe more explosive, screens out the backfield, more of a flex options in regard to that. And I think Deebo Samuel is more of a yards after catch type of wide receiver. For what I remember, I don't have the sets directly in front of me, but I believe Deebo Samuel over the last 4 years had like about 8 yards per catch, I believe, after the catch. And I think it led the league for the past 4 years. It might be second overall over the last 2 years. So I think Deebo Samuel is going to be a pretty explosive component. I'm really excited about him. And I'm curious how it's going to work out. I think Terry's going to be fine, but I also think Deebo's going to be great. So I think so Terry might not have the 13 touchdowns he had last year, but I don't think it's as long as the offense is scoring, I'm okay with that.
And then obviously Jaden Daniels impacted McLaurin so much last season. And, this isn't something I really like to ask, but you look at a guy like CJ Stroud, who kind of, didn't match expectations going into his second year. And I'm not obviously going to say that Jaden Daniels is going to take a big step back, but you look at someone who played so good in their rookie season, they made it to the NFC Championship game. It's going to be hard to match that. Are we going to see some sort of a sophomore slump from him potentially this season?
I don't think so. I think when people keep talking about, hey, Jaden Daniels might get worse, my counter to that is he can get better. Like he's, in theory,
Yeah.
hits his second year, he can take a step forward. If you compare Jaden Daniels to CJ Stroud, Jaden Daniels is a much better, superior athlete than CJ Stroud. He can run, he can escape. He has that one element up his sleeve, that ace up his sleeve if someone blitzes him and goes that way, right? We know about Jaden Daniels' work ethic. We know about his VR work and how well he can process. So I think that's one thing that's really strong with them. I love the continuity. I think the fact that our offensive staff stayed here in DC is huge, right? Cliff Kingsbury staying here, Davita Pritchard, David Blau, Anthony Lynn, keeping that entire offensive staff together allows Jaden to not only continue with the playbook, but expand on it even further. Finally, we're rounding out our offensive tackles. We got Josh Connolly and Laramie Tunzel, who I think is going to help him out and protect him more. And I had another point I was going to in regard to CJ Stroud, one thing that people overlook, CJ Stroud had a good year. We know that. He got to the playoffs at 1-1 game. But people kind of overlook the fact that his wide receivers were going down left and right last year, right? Like Stephon Diggs tore his ACL. Tank Dell tore multiple ligaments in his knee. Nico Collins was gone for most of the year. So even though CJ Stroud had a quote-unquote regression, he didn't have the weapons that he had, that his rookie year. Basically, he lost a step in regard to what we would have. While on the flip side, Daniels is adding weapons. We added Deebo Samuel, who's more of an explosive component. We'll see what happens with Noah Brown. I thought Noah Brown was a pretty solid addition for Washington last year. Like I didn't know where he was going to fit in, but he had I think he had 35 catches in like 8 games last year or something like in regard to that. But then now that now that Noah Brown's down, we'll see what happens. If he's really hurt, which it sounds like
Mhm.
it's pretty heavy, they might actually dip into the free agent well, like Keenan Allen or Amari Cooper or something like
Yeah.
that, and that's a pretty good addition.
Now, I don't think it's necessarily in my mind a question on whether Jaden's getting better or worse in that sense, because
Mhm,
you practice a whole off season, you're going into your second year. You're obviously going to, or at least hopefully gonna be better than that first year.
mhm.
But I think my concern, and something I wanna ask you, is this season, how do you view this season if they don't make it back to the NFC Championship game?
The NFC Championship is the high bar, right? So,
Mhm.
I'm a little bit
Yeah.
older than you, Matthew. I've been following this team my entire life.
Mhm.
It's been since 1991, so they made the
Yeah.
NFC Championship
Mhm.
game. So for me, that's a rarity to get there. I think it would be disappointing if they don't make the playoffs. I think it's playoff or
Mhm.
bust for
Definitely.
Washington. NFC Championship, I would love to get back there again. If we get back there again, that's fantastic. That's back-to-back conference championship. That's
Mhm.
elite NFL royalty at that point. Like that
Yeah.
many teams do. That's Eagles, that's Ravens, that's 49ers, that's teams that kind of are hanging around that, Kansas City year after year,
Mhm.
Buffalo Bills that are up there. And I'd love to be in that upper tier. I think Washington's going to have it's going to be interesting. We have a pretty difficult schedule. When you are second place in your division, when you're playing the NFC North, you start seeing these more well-rounded high schedule in the AFC West. You're going to have these pretty difficult schedules. So Washington was 12-5 last year with a lot of positive bounces going our way. Certain turnovers and field goals going in,
Mhm.
so on and so forth. Washington might take a slight step back, 11-6, 10-7, something along the lines of that. But I still think they might be a better team altogether because I think our offensive line is better. I think our defensive backs are better. And I
Mhm.
think Jaden Daniels is going to take a step forward this year as well. So we might be a competitive team, but you never know. Getting to the playoffs, bad matchups, you never
Yeah.
know. But honestly, last year was such a fun ride. At the Detroit game,
Yeah.
man, that was so much fun to watch.
Absolutely, and, with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you wanna say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, man. So, Matthew, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you. You have great interview questions. You're really on top of it. So, thank you for that. It's awesome. Definitely for those of you that are watching Matthew's show, support him 100%. Also, give us a follow at
Yep.
gcarmi21. I
Mhm.
also do a show Monday, Wednesday, Friday with Big Doug. We do a lot of content. We typically try to go through, game wrap ups, film reviews. We try to get on some big guests from the NFL and from our local media to interview them. So, definitely give us a shout.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Go subscribe to the Big Doug and Carmi show. Great content being put out over there, and if you made it up to this point, I really appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to show support, and as always, we will see you next time.